Hello and welcome to the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast. My name's Hugh, and this week I'm joined by regular special guest host Helen Daly. Hello, Helen.
Hello, Hugh. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for joining us. Morgan is off. I think we've run out of fun Doctor Who things to say. He's trapped in a collapsing dwarf star, so he couldn't make it this week. But Helen's joining me instead to talk about something very exciting. Last week we had planned to talk about this, but we were slightly gazumped by developing events. So we're instead going to talk about it this week, which is what we can expect from Doctor Who season 13. Obviously, we talked about this on the podcast like a year ago when series 12 ended, but there's been a lot of new information since then, a lot of new leaks and exciting information. So we thought it was time to kind of have a look again, starting with probably the big news, the official news that we have about series 13, which is that, Helen, do you want to say?
I need a drum roll, I think.
Okay.
Great. That John Bishop will be the new companion in the Tardis. Of exciting news.
Dun, dun, dun. So when this was announced, it was a bit of a like, whoa moment, because the BBC had been pretty good at keeping it secret. They'd sort of at least implied that it was just going to be Jodie Whittaker and Mandip Gill doing Doctor Who, which I think would have been quite interesting. But to be honest, in hindsight, obviously they were always going to want to add someone new, because that's more interesting, right? Like, you kind of want a bit of new blood, you kind of want a new character in there, and it does seem like Dan's sort of a different sort of person to Graham and Ryan. I mean, from the little we've seen of him, I think you've got the little blurb the BBC had about him.
I do, yes. The BBC have said that he will face evil alien races beyond his wildest nightmare when he travels through space and time alongside the Doctor and Yaz. Chris Chibnall added, "It's time for the next chapter of Doctor Who," and it starts with a man called Dan.
Dan the man.
Very good, very good. Executive producer Matt Strevens, he added, "It's been a total joy having John join the cast, and we've been having a lot of fun on set already. I'm sure they have been, and we can't wait for you to meet Dan when the show returns later this year."
Yeah, so I mean, I on a personal note, this was shocking news because we got the information through quite late, so I had to go through and rewrite quite a lot of our Doctor Who content, talking about how it's just going to be the Doctor and Yaz. So that's a little insight into we don't always get the inside scoop very far ahead of time, but got a little bit ahead of time. Yeah, it's really interesting because it's interesting, especially if this is going to be Jodie Whittaker's last series, which is sort of the rumor, which we'll talk about later, is that John Bishop's coming in to possibly only play this character for a few episodes. He's coming into an established TARDIS setup. Morgan and I were talking about this. It's not that common to have a new companion kind of join an established Doctor and companion, if you know what I mean. Like, well, I couldn't really think of that many examples of that.
I think the closest example I can kind of think of is when we met Rory, and he didn't kind of join as a full-time companion until a little bit later on.
So he is in that first episode with them, though, isn't he?
Yeah, it's a similar but not the same. I see what you're saying. We aren't starting afresh for the first time in a long time, and I kind of quite like that. I think the Doctor and Yaz, they have such a strong relationship. Very strong according to some fans, and I think having their relationship tested by a new force is going to be something really interesting to explore. Whether he will test their relationship or whether he's just going to slot in nicely is yet to be seen, but I can't imagine that they would resist the temptation to throw a little bit of a spanner in the works at some point.
Well, you'd hope there'd be a bit of interpersonal drama. Like, I can imagine this era of the show kind of not wanting to dwell on it too much, because sometimes it doesn't. But I feel like, Yaz is so attached to the Doctor. We saw in Revolution of the Daleks, she's so like into that relationship and like traveling with the Doctor and stuff. It's kind of like this new guy comes in. Surely she'd feel a little bit put out, a little bit jealous. She might even feel a bit bad for Graham and Ryan. I don't know. You kind of hope they're going to go in on that a little bit, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like that I was here first kind of relationship that you expect is probably going to happen. We've seen it before. Amy gets jealous because Rory's on the TARDIS, and I think it's a really interesting prospect, definitely. And I think John Bishop is a pretty good casting, actually, a pretty good scoop from the BBC, definitely.
It's an interesting casting. I mean, it's because we did a Who Could Replace Bradley Walsh and Tosin Cole piece a while back. And we were sort of thinking about the sort of people who it would be. And I was thinking, I feel like they could try and get someone in a similar sort of mold as Bradley Walsh, who's this sort of light entertainment figure who does acting but isn't necessarily known for it. And I was kind of thinking of people more like, I mean, these people both do acting, but I was thinking like, oh, Will Mellor or Larry Lamb. Do you know what I mean? I was kind of thinking of comedy people. And actually, John Bishop kind of does fit that mold even better than they do, because he's mainly known as a stand-up, but he does do serious acting, kind of like how Bradley Walsh was mainly known as a TV presenter, but he did also do serious acting before. So it's kind of like he's got that kind of mass appeal. He's got like 4 million Twitter followers or something, but he also, you know, has the acting chops, I think, to pull it off. So it's kind of like he's sort of an everyman figure, which is something that this era of Doctor Who's very keen to kind of appeal to. I mean, one of the only things we do know about him, because they did like a little mini trailer for him, is that, well, he's from Liverpool, which isn't that surprising, but also he seems to be some sort of painter decorator, right? Like he's sort of loading stuff into a van, or he at least knows somebody who is. And it's kind of like they kind of really seem to be pushing him, like how Graham, you know, is this bus driver from Sheffield who doesn't believe in aliens and kind of ends up seeing the wider world. You know, it feels like he's a similar sort of character.
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say John Bishop is quite good at playing the working class role. You know, he was in Skins. He's been in Ken Loach's Root Irish. He's been in an ITV drama, again, playing another Liverpudlian called Fearless. I think it's something that would work quite well for John Bishop. I think, you know, he is that likable chap. He is that guy that you could quite easily have a conversation with in the pub. In the future in the pub. Not yet. But I think he's a really well-liked guy, and I think it's actually going to be really interesting to see him step into, you know, a proper sci-fi, see him do something a little bit more imaginative, a bit more creative, and just see where the role takes him. But I'm actually really excited to see him. I think he's a really great guy, and I think Dan will be the man.
Great. I mean, it does tend to happen that when you get a new companion, the Doctor Who reboots a little bit, and I hope that does bring a bit of life and, you know, excitement to the new series. Obviously, we should delve in a little bit on in that little blurb the BBC gave. It said he's going to be facing monsters beyond his wildest nightmares, and although this hasn't been officially announced, we do actually have a pretty good idea of what some of these monsters are. Listeners may have noticed we're moving from very official confirmed things to things that we're pretty sure about but aren't officially confirmed, and then later on we'll be going to sort of hearsay about Series 13. But one of the first times John Bishop was seen filming for Series 13, we knew he was in it before he was announced as a companion. A lot of people just thought he was an actor in it. Was they seemed to be filming an episode with Sontarans. So we haven't actually seen Sontarans in Doctor Who properly for a while. The last sort of proper Sontaran episode was in 2008. Then we had Strax, who was obviously a Sontaran character, was acting alongside Matt Smith's Doctor quite a lot, and Peter Capaldi's Doctor once. I think the last time we saw him was in about 2014. So we have seen Sontarans around, but this looks like a new design for them. It looks like they're kind of out in force. It might be a historical story, we're not really sure, but it's quite interesting. I mean, what are your thoughts on the Sontarans? Would you be excited to see them again?
I think they're always quite good value. You know, they're quite funny. They're quite a little bit intimidating. You know, probably not the most scariest monster, but I think it's always nice to see a classic monster come back. Sontarans with new costume, whether that's true or not, I think it would be good to see them have a bit of an upgrade and maybe take them a little bit more seriously, because they've always been that kind of Mr. Potato Head kind of character. Yeah. I wonder how they'll bounce off someone with the comedy chops like John Bishop.
That's true. I didn't think of that.
It'd be quite interesting to see. I wonder if they'll go down that route, because that seems like quite an obvious route, or if they'll actually make them quite threatening. I really hope they make them more threatening, because I think they, you know, an army of monsters is scary. That's what the Daleks are. It's what the Cybermen are. So I think they do have the potential to be up there as one of the scariest monsters, but whether they will be is probably yet to be seen.
Yeah, I'm quite interested because I feel like they're a relatively underused Doctor Who monster, because, you know, people love returning to the Daleks and Cybermen so much. They don't they had their one upgrade and then they haven't really been back again. I mean, even the Ice Warriors have had, I think, slightly more. They've had a couple of stories over the years. So I'm quite interested to see what they do with them. Like you say, it would be interesting to see if they do a different side with them. I also find it quite interesting that, again, if this is Jodie Whittaker's last series, which we'll get to later, it's kind of interesting to see them throwing in like these familiar monsters, almost like a bit of a gauntlet for it, because there's some other ones as well, apparently. And it's interesting to think, like you said, if there's this big army of Sontarans, you know, her facing off with them, whether that's John Bishop's first episode or whatever, like you could imagine that being quite a sort of baptism of fire, literally, possibly in some cases. And yeah, I don't know, it's quite interesting. And I actually quite like the Sontarans. It's, you know, like I said, I like sort of the fact that they're a monster who's been around for a while, but they're not there all the time. They're not the Daleks, they're not the Cybermen. It's kind of, you know, nice to see them coming back.
Yeah, no, in terms of the Sontarans, and in terms of your point about they're bringing back allegedly quite a few classic monsters for Jodie's final series, if it is her final series, it kind of does seem to start adding up in my head that it could be her. And you know, they kind of chuck literally the kitchen sink at a doctor when they're about to regenerate. We saw it quite literally with Matt Smith. So I think, you know, if she's going to face quite a lot of classic monsters, it doesn't look great for the 13th Doctor, but, you know, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, we should say one of the other classic monsters that she's rumoured to appear with, maybe classic's the wrong word, but very popular monster, is the Weeping Angels. So there have been rumours of this for quite a long time. They were filming, someone was filming a Weeping Angel in, I believe in Penarth in South Wales a few months ago, and people weren't sure whether it was for Doctor Who or not. But because they're also doing a Weeping Angel game at the moment, so people thought it might be for that, some sort of promotional thing. But as of this week, depending on when you listen to this, but you know, in early January, Jodie Whittaker has been seen filming on a beach with a Weeping Angel, which seems pretty conclusive. You know, it's a slightly different looking Weeping Angel, which we won't get into too many details. I'm not sure. I mean, we're sort of delving into spoilers here, but you know, they're filming outside. You know, people know about it. If you're listening to this, you probably know about it already. But yeah, it seems like the Weeping Angels are coming back. And again, this is a really interesting choice because the Weeping Angels have only really had 2 stories. They're probably one of the only classic modern monsters in that they're the kind of ones that have been created since 2005 who have recurred a lot. I mean, maybe the Silence as well a little bit. A couple of the ones that popped up in Revolution of the Daleks, actually. Obviously, there's a Weeping Angel there, which might have been a bit of a clue. But, you know, they've done 2 big stories. They did, no, 3 big stories, actually, because they did Blink, they did Time of Angels, Flesh and Stone, and then The Angels Take Manhattan. Great title, not such a good episode. So it's been a while since that. That was in 2012, I think. The last time we had a proper Angels episode, and they sort of have little cameos, and they turned up in Class. If you ever watched Class, the Doctor Who spin-off. But yeah, we've not seen them for a really long time, and you know, we didn't see Peter Capaldi's Doctor with them at all. They were created by the previous showrunner Stephen Moffat, so he must have had to be involved to kind of give his permission for this. I mean, I've talked for a long time here. Are you excited to see the Weeping Angels back?
Yeah, no, I actually am. I think, God, 2012 seems like such a long time ago. And I think it was probably right that they had that break because, you know, we've talked before about kind of overusing a character in Doctor Who, like the Daleks can kind of weaken their terror almost. But I think the Weeping Angels are still a genuinely very good and very exciting monster because you don't know what's going to happen next with them. And they are very unpredictable still because we don't really know everything about them yet. So I think it's actually a really great time for them to come back, and I'm actually really excited to see what they're doing on the beach. You know, it sounds a bit like a Doctor Who Cluedo special, you know, Weeping
That'd be
Angel
so cool
on a beach with Jodie Whittaker. So you know, did they do it? Who knows?
I think that's about. I mean, I'd love to see a Doctor Who murder mystery. I think that'd be brilliant. As they sort of did that, didn't they, with the Unicorn and the Wasp? But they could do it again with the Weeping Angel. I think as well, it's kind of interesting with these guys, the Weeping Angels and the Sontarans. Obviously, we know this series has been slightly curtailed by coronavirus restrictions. There's 8 episodes instead of 11, and they're not doing any overseas filming, which is what this era of Doctor Who has been very fond of. And you do kind of wonder whether it's like, well, look, we're going to have to bring out the big guns. Do you know what I mean? Like we've done Daleks and Cybermen. What other great monsters are there? What are we going to be able to do if we can't, you know, go and film in these amazing locales? What can we do here in the UK that will still make it an exciting series? It's like Weeping Angels. They're a monster that's still people still talk about. I mean, our colleague Michael, the Radio Times sports editor, said that he doesn't watch Doctor Who, but he still finds the Weeping Angels scary. And we ran a poll asking the readers which monster they wanted to bring back a few months ago. Weeping Angels. You know, like people still like them. People still find them scary. They haven't really been overused in the same way as like you say, the Daleks or, you know, even the Master. You know, when Sash One came back, we were like, wow, the Master's back. But it had been less than 3 years since, you know, actually basically just 2 years more or less since the Master had last been on screen, whereas it's been like, you know, 8 years or 4 years if you count Class since the Weeping Angels have been around. It kind of feels like they've rested long enough, and it's nice that we can bring them back for a proper story, you know, a proper scary Doctor Who story with the Weeping Angels, but with a new Doctor. I mean, that's quite exciting.
Yeah, no, I'm really interested to see how Jodie's Doctor takes them on. And there was some kind of pictures. There was someone who has set Twitter alight a little bit that looks a little bit like Sally Sparrow in the sense that she's wearing a similar kind of whimsical 60s costume. Is this the return of Sally Sparrow? I highly doubt it, but potentially negative would be quite nice.
And they couldn't get Carey Mulligan, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, she's too busy doing, Gatsby and stuff.
Yeah.
bigger fish to fry. But I think going back to your point as well about the locations and whether they need to bring out the Weeping Angels, I don't think they've ever necessarily needed to bring out the big guns. I think Doctor Who at its heart is a show that turns, plungers into very, very scary monsters. It doesn't need to go abroad. It's always amazing, of course, when it does. It brings out huge spectacles, but I think Doctor Who is just as scary and emotive on a beach as we've seen in The Parting of the Ways, as it is with a massive shoot in New York or Lanzarote or wherever else they head off to. So I think whatever the Weeping Angels are going to bring out, it's going to be spectacular. It'll be a blockbuster episode, no doubt, because the Weeping Angels are that kind of monster that just give good stories. And I think that's really what we want for, if it is Jodie's final season, we want it to go out with a bang, right?
Yeah, I mean, that feels like a very natural segue to the last point of this week's podcast, which is Jodie Whittaker leaving. We obviously, Morgan and I last week talked a lot about whether that's true, what it could mean and stuff. But there's a few things like worth talking about, because obviously if this is Jodie Whittaker's last season, the story is that she's leaving. That's surely going to impact these stories in a big way. You talked about how, all these monsters, it's like they're throwing things at the Doctor. And to an extent, they have that's true. But also, I feel like the series needs to cram a lot in, because if we're only getting 8 episodes for Jodie Whittaker's final run, it's like, do they need to bring back Sacha Dhawan's master? I feel like they kind of do. He's only starred with her in 3 episodes, and they have this kind of unresolved tension, and we know he survived. Do they need to bring back Joe Martin's other Doctor? You'd kind of think so, at least once before the end. Or, will the next Doctor pick that story up? Like David Tennant met River Song, but she was mainly starring with Matt Smith. Do you know what I mean? Like it can kind of work either way. I mean, how big a part of the story do you think Jodie's exit would be, in terms of, like, when David Tennant was leaving, it felt like it was like a whole year or so of them teasing this is going to happen. And I mean, do you think it's going to be a major plot point, or will it just be kind of like, I mean, I guess like Peter Capaldi's final season was a normal season, and then at the end he kind of just regenerated. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see them kind of going down as a snap regeneration as such. I wonder whether they would dedicate a full season to the arc. It would be nice if they did, because personally, I think Jodie, I have really enjoyed her Doctor and would love to see her do more. If this is the end, then I think it would be nice to see her go out with a big bang. But what I can see happening is that, as you said, there's been a lot of kind of loose ends with the Master. We've seen her delve into the Doctor's past, uncover a lot of secrets that has been picked up and then left again. So I wonder if they will delve back into that. I wonder whether she'll just go back into prison, whether prison will come back up again. There's been a lot of kind of big stuff that's happened for her incarnation, and it seems too tempting to ignore all of that if it was to be her swan song. How they would tie it all up together, that is definitely not my job. But I would be really curious to see what they would leave out and why, because I think they'd have to address it further on, like you say, with the following Doctor.
I think so too. I mean, the fact that it feels like it's going to be a little bit more like, when Christopher Eccleston left and David Tennant came in, it kind of stayed like the same show. Whereas I think there was a bit more of a reboot between Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi. With Chris Chibnall staying on, which is the rumor, even if Jodie leaves, it feels like he could kind of have whoever the next Doctor is continue a lot of these storylines, and kind of like, it may not be such a like, this is the end of an era. It might just be, here's a continuation. Arguably you could even have like, maybe Dan and Mandip Gill's Yaz wouldn't even necessarily need to leave. Do you know what I mean? They could carry on with the next Doctor. Like, there's no particular reason just because Jodie Whittaker's leaving that they would have to. But I don't know. It's all quite unprecedented. This, like, it's obviously we've had Doctors leave before, but we've sort of tended to have them leave after a little bit longer. We talked last week. Obviously, Jodie's been in the role for about the same amount of time, like from casting to exit. Again, if this rumor's true, but she won't have done as many episodes. She'll have done about 10 to 14 less, about a series less than other Doctors. So it's sort of kind of in between the Christopher Eccleston sort of thing where he left very early, and the Matt Smith, Peter Capaldi, or David Tennant thing, where they kind of were in it for quite a long time. She's sort of in between. So it is a bit unprecedented. It's kind of like, to what extent are they going to try and wrap everything up? To what extent is our storylines going to carry on? Would we even want them to try and wrap up, like, say, the Timeless Child storyline, the Fugitive Doctor, whatever's going on with Sacha Dhawan? Would we even want that to kind of be rushed through in 8 episodes, or would we rather they kind of didn't necessarily resolve it with Jodie and then had the next Doctor pick them up? I mean, I guess it kind of depends on how they choose to address all this stuff. And if they do address all this stuff, arguably you could never see Jo Martin's Doctor again. Like, she kind of served her purpose, arguably. Like, we'd all love to see her again, but maybe the show won't bring her back. I don't know. It's all just a bit, as is becoming clear, there's not actually much we know about what to expect, and the possibilities are kind of endless. But yeah, I don't know. It feels like it has to be important that she's leaving. That has to be part of it. Like, that's kind of how you make it a selling point rather than a detriment of the show, right? If you're leading, your leading actors leaving, you kind of want to make that make it a positive for you. Like, you can turn it into a story that will appeal to people, rather than like, oh no, she's just leaving, that's just bad. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and of course she's been the first female Doctor. Like, she's a trailblazer for the show, without a doubt. It would be such a shame for her not to have a big exit. If it was the kind of Peter Capaldi snap exit, I think it would be quite disappointing. I think she needs to have the big David Tennant final victory swan song of an episode. I think it would be really fantastic for her. It does depend, of course, whether Chris Chibnall's staying on. The rumor is, of course, that he is. He can kind of get away with rolling the story on. I think if he's leaving, then it would feel right to tie it up. It would also be interesting to see whether Yaz and, of course, Dan would stay on. It would be a shame to see Dan leave after one episode. It feels like it's a kind of 1-year contract and done. So, I'd like to see him become more of a permanent member of staff, even at this early stage. You kind of want, it takes more than a season to get to warm to a companion, I think. And it would be unfair if he was leaving with Jodie, if that was true.
Yeah, I mean, he would have literally just done 8 episodes, which is like, Pearl Mackie got to do 12, and at the time, well, 13 actually in the end, because she did the special. And, we thought that was a bit of a shame. And it's kind of like, no, he only got to do 8. That would be quite rubbish for him.
Yeah, no, I think whatever they're going to bring out, it's going to be epic, because like we've already seen, the Sontarans and the Weeping Angels are going to be coming back. So the standard's been set pretty high for this series, I would say. Also, a big name like John Bishop, who's got some serious acting chops on him, I think serves it well. In terms of the story, I hope that she does go out with a bang if she does, and I hope that I think it'd be really cool to see some stories tied up. Definitely.
I agree. But what do you think, our listeners, if indeed you are still listening? Are you excited to see the return of monsters like the Sontarans and the Weeping Angels? If Jodie Whittaker is leaving, do you think the series should make a big deal of it, or should they just kind of let her go quietly, if that's the right way to say it? And, what do you think of John Bishop as Dan? We haven't really had a chance to ask about that, because obviously last week we were dealing with the more breaking news. But let us know what you think he's going to be like, and whether you're excited to see a new companion in the TARDIS. We'll be back next week. Some combination of presenters, whoever wants to do it, to talk hopefully about the possible return of Torchwood, although maybe we won't if there is breaking news in between now and then. Can't make any promises. Until then, I've been Hugh.
I've been Helen.
And this has been us doing lots of baseless speculation about Doctor Who, as per usual. Goodbye.